this is going to sound really, really screwed up. If they do all the things exactly as they should, which is the most optimized for their own performance from the very jump, I think they limit their career. Doing something a little bit different today. We have some questions that you guys posted to our YouTube community, and Noah has some other topics. So we're just kind of winging this, kind of going old school, going back to some of the format that I used to do years ago, and we'll kind of see where this goes from here. So what do you got?
All right, let's start out with something that I saw recently was some topics buzzing is the enhanced games. So I kind of wanted to know your thoughts on it. I kind of have mine. I haven't thought much about it, but I just want to hear what you have to say about these enhanced games coming about.
I completely forgot about these, and you brought up that this would be a topic, so I looked it up a little briefly. I didn't spend a whole lot of time looking the whole thing up, but what I wondered, first off, I wondered when it was, where it looks like it's going to be in May. So it's actually kind of happening, but there's some trial things that are going on right now. And one of the former podcast guests that we came out, we discussed this, and my original thought was this is not going to be top tier athletes. It'd be like a tier down. And I was misinformed, because as I went and looked, there are a few Olympic gold medalists, silver medalists, and so forth that are going to be in this. There's a 100-meter Fred Kerley, I believe. Hunter Armstrong is a swimmer. There's another sprinter. So there are some people in there that, but it's where I got hung up when I was looking this whole thing up is when you go to their website, and all this is going to be allegedly, because I didn't spend a whole lot of time looking at this, is they also sell, it looks like, supplements in their own TRT services. So it looks like this whole Olympic game thing is like a two-pronged business model. So you have the games, but then you also have that their TRT provider, selling those kind of things. So it's the first thing that kind of hit my head there is, oh, okay, this is just a giant marketing play, which it very well could be. I don't know, allegedly, with all this kind of stuff. But when it's on their website, it's like shop, and then there's like the TRT and the supplements and stuff like that. It plays into it. But if I go back to what my original thoughts were on this whole thing was there's an assumption that all the Olympic athletes are clean, right? Which is not true, right? So it's going to be interesting, because I don't know, because if some of these guys that I looked at, and I probably should have spent more time preparing for this, but if some of them that I looked at are going to compete in future Olympics, and then they're going to do this, then I don't know, is this going to disqualify them for competing in any other future Olympics?
Right.
Because of that. The other thing is it's the medically supervised part is kind of weird, because I would think that, actually, I can't say I know, because I don't definitively know every single professional athlete or Olympic athlete. They are medically supervised,
right?
With all that. So when I look at the medically supervised, is it going to be less than what they would normally do? Because they're going to be super cautious, because this is very visible, right? So if they, if they screw somebody up, through the whole thing, then everybody's going to kind of know. Where now, if somebody gets kind of screwed up, nobody really knows, because it's all kind of like hidden from the whole thing. Are they going to break records over and above? That's to be seen. We already kind of have the enhanced game. This is kind of where I'm going. It's like we already kind of have the enhanced games. So it's happening. I didn't know if it was ever going to happen. The weird thing, though, is it seems like the PR associated with this is not great. Because
I haven't seen anything about it other than like a few things online, just like saying, oh, enhanced games are coming and they're a thing. And then I saw a video that Mitchell Hooper posted, and he's like the only name I really knew, where I was kind of like, okay, this actually,
and that doesn't even seem like it's part of the games. It just looks like he's going to do a deadlift competition against Thor.
Right.
Like that's not like the deadlift is not an Olympic game, or it's not the Olympics anyhow. It's the enhanced games. But a year ago or whenever they first started talking about it, there was a lot of buzz,
Right.
way more buzz than there is now. So it's their marketing could be better. I mean, we're talking about it, so I suppose
Yeah.
that's probably a good thing. So
Right.
Mitchell Hooper did his job.
I
You know, we
guess,
got
yeah.
other people talking about it, so that kind of helps. But I'll watch it. I mean, yeah,
I'll probably watch the YouTube cut
yeah,
of like
yeah.
the main events. Because I mean, is it going to be televised, you think, or is it just going to be like a streaming thing? YouTube? I don't know how they're going to go about it.
I don't know. I just spent maybe 10 minutes kind of looking at it. And when I was looking at it, the main thing I was looking at was who's going to be competing and then what tier, you know, is the athlete that's competing. And there are some, you know, there are some that are like, shit, you know, it will be interesting to see. But the other thing is I don't know how long they've known this is going on. Right? When you're dealing with Olympic athletes, they're dealing with a quadrennial when it comes to the training and the preparation, which is a 4-year cycle. And then there's the worlds and stuff like that, which happens every year. But the whole training is kind of laid out, you know, from the sport training to the strength and conditioning over that whole quadrennial. This is like, hey, this is going to happen maybe I think it's going to happen late 2025 at first.
Yeah.
Like this is going to happen maybe this year, but maybe next year. And now I guess it's May. I don't know how long they've known. So it's a lot of sport performance takes time to be able to peak and to be able to get into top shape, which isn't going to play well to anybody that's competing in it. They don't have, you know, that whole quadrennial to prepare for, or even like a year. I mean, I don't know how long they've known May, right? I mean, if they have a year, they can prepare a little bit better, but it's the first time. You know, it's the other thing that kind of hit me is this a marketing thing?
Right.
You know, so you follow the money. I mean, it'd be ill-advised to say that the Olympics also aren't a marketing thing, but this definitely is a marketing ploy.
Yeah. And I was also thinking maybe because it was so kind of not well put out there, this could almost be like a soft launch kind of, and then see how it does. And then if it does like really well, like for them, then start promoting it more, trying to get more athletes and trying to make it like its own thing.
Yeah, but how are they going to define well? How are they going to define well?
How much
Like,
money they make, or
well, they're going to lose money, right?
yeah,
The Olympics lose money. I mean, they lose a shit ton of money. Well, I take that back. The host country or city typically loses a shit ton of money because they got to prepare everything. But this just looks like it's in Vegas. There's not a whole lot of sports, you know. So the revenue, I suppose, would be spectators, ad revenue. I'm not really sure what the revenue. I don't know how they're going to determine if they did well, right? Because it could be, well, if this loses X amount of money, but you know, their ads happen to be all their products and services, they sell really well, then it's well. You know, I don't know how they're going to define the metrics of if this does well.
Yeah.
You know,
I don't know.
yes, because it is a business.
Yeah. Another thing on here was trying to program for someone who is a natural athlete and someone who is not. Like, is there a differentiate, whatever the word is, between the two? Like, if someone is enhanced, how would their training differ from someone who is not enhanced? Like, is it literally like the same thing, just different volume, or is it more certain exercises or reps, and basically just anything? How can you differentiate the two, if any?
I'll say there's no difference. There's a lot of nuance when it comes to that, to where it's all individual, right? So the general answer to everything is it depends, but it's all individual when it comes to the training stimulus of the person. I've seen people who are on, you know, a couple of the traits that I've seen are their ability to explode or their ability to generate force is higher, right? So if they're squatting and they're coming out of the bottom, they're coming out with more force, which can be more fatiguing, and that can have its own detrimental effects as far as recovery goes, just because the stimulus is just faster, it's more explosive. The person that's on can also be more aggressive, which is also going to be more stimulus to be able to recover from. So it's where I'm going with this is I've seen a lot of natural strength athletes and across the board. So strongman, bodybuilding, I classify all of them as strength athletes who essentially have a higher work capacity than those that are on, right? There can be a couple reasons for that. One can be what I said, their ability to display force is going to be higher. So it's going to be more fatiguing. So it's going to be harder to be able to recover because of all that. In most cases, they're going to carry more muscle mass, which is also going to be another thing that's going to, require more energy to be able to move the weights and so forth. So the assumption that most people make is that the person that's on can do more work and be able to recover better. But the reality from what I've seen is the inverse of that. Like the person that's on, yes, they're going to move more weight. Yes, they're going to be bigger. Yes, it works. All those things are going to play into there. But usually the solution for the person who's on is if they're at a sticking point, in a lot of the cases, not all, but in a lot of the cases, the solution is reducing the overall workload, because they're to allow them to recover. I see the inverse when it's somebody that's clean. When it's somebody that's clean, it's usually they got to increase the workload a little bit. So that's the first false thing that kind of gets portrayed in a lot, almost all the time. But in the real world, I rarely ever see that being the case. Person goes on, now they can do way more work. Just does not happen. They'll get gassed. It's all the things that I was talking about, plus probably a lot more that are going to fall in the scientific community side that can explain it a little bit better. It's just what I've seen. So when you back that off and it comes down to training, the common denominator with all of them is learning how to auto-regulate the training, which is a topic that's been part of the podcast since it first started. Tom just did a video about it. We have ebook that's for free. You click the link in the description. It will take you to the ebook to where what we're trying to do and what I've been trying to do forever now is to help people understand how to go about doing that. And there are some metrics where, Tom put the ebook together, such as grip strength and resting heart rate and all these other variables that you can use to see if you're recovered or not recovered. But they only cover half of it. There's so much when it comes to trying to figure out what works for training, because you have all the recovery modalities. I mean, you got technical, physical, and mental, right? And it's easy to say those three things, right? But the technicals, all the technical aspects, how you're doing the reps, all those things that play into that, which I think it was Dwayne Jackson when I had him on, we kind of went into the weeds with all these things. There's a lot that just falls into the physical domain. All right. And then in the technical, then in the physical domain, there's a whole lot that goes into that. Then in the mental domain, there's a whole lot that goes into that. So when you're looking at, science-based training, like how in the hell are they able to cover all those different things that play into this when you can study one variable out of, I don't know, 1,000 that plays into it. So when you're looking at that, the nuance of this auto-regulation part is, first, if you're making progress, then you don't change anything, right? That's the first thing. And it blows my mind how quickly somebody will want to change when they're making progress. That doesn't always happen. There's a lot of times you'll hit these lulls where it just sits for a while. Then you got to play around with some different things to be able to get it to take off again. But if you're making progress, what what do you think, you're going to make faster progress? You know, it's, and I get
If it
it.
ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, I get it, because it's like, if you want to get bigger, you want to get stronger, you want it all to come faster. That's never changed. But if you're making progress, you're moving forward. There's a lot of people that don't, you know, they just stay at a certain level until they figure out the one thing that be able to pull them back up again. That doesn't change if it's natty or not natty or whatever. The training stimulus will play into there. But when you know when to pull back and when to push harder, in other words, you have to be able to figure out what your minimum recovery threshold is and what your maximal is. And then you can fluctuate your training based upon that, you know, on a daily basis, on, you know, weekly, whatever it's going to be. Until you figure that out, you're living off a spreadsheet or an app or some other kind of shit, which will do well for a little bit of time. But when it stops doing well, what are you going to do? You know, this has been one of my biggest criticisms of the whole online coaching thing when it first started coming about. It's not bad, right? I may have said it was bad in the past, I'm not sure, but it's not bad because it's going to provide, you know, guidance to be able to help at least start on the right page. But they have to do a better job of helping these athletes learn when to dial up, when to dial down, right? Because if you full throttle for too long, you get hurt, right? If you're at that minimum dose for way too long, you're not going to make any progress. So there's a balance that has to be played in there, which I call auto-regulation, you know, fuck around, find out, figure it out, you know, all these other type of things. And I think as a community as a whole, you know, if I look at can't say a whole, but if I look at the people that are in my sphere that I can see, they have lost, they're not losing, they have lost the ability to be able to figure shit out, right? And when you're the person that's under the bar and you're the person that's doing the training, you're going to rely on a coach to be able to figure it out. That doesn't work real well when you're on rep 5 of a 8 rep set and you got to figure out, this is hard, really hard. Do I push super, super hard for the 8, or do I just do the 6? This is shit you got to figure out, and you kind of learn from experience. But if that experience is being taken away from you because somebody else is being offloaded to somebody else, then you're not going to fucking learn it. And eventually at some point in time, you're going to have to figure it out.
Yeah.
Right. So the coaching thing has to be the communication has to be in there to be able to help people figure those things out, because numbers on paper are not the same as numbers on your back.
Right. One thing I noticed with the science-based lifting thing, I'm not slamming it because I've followed it, well, not as much anymore, but I did follow it for a long time, and I did see a lot of progress. The more I've been around the culture here, I've noticed that the science-based lifters, they say they're all kind of preaching the same thing, like this is optimal, this is what you should be doing. And then past that, it's like there's not much about it. Like there's some where they talk about kind of recovery and everything, but it's more like this is the best way to do it. And if you're not doing it this way, you're not going to see as many gains. As opposed to here, it's like, because I used to follow an app to train. I did for years. And since coming here, I've started using a book, and I write little notes to myself like this weight felt good, try 5 more pounds next week. Now there's some apps that do that, but it just seems more like I'm invested and can keep track of it better, and writing like the date, the gym I'm at, what I'm working on, and all that stuff. So it just seems like there's like what the science-based lifters are not talking about is like the stuff we're talking about here. Like you can't find as much content like that on their page. It's more of this is how you do it, this is the best way. Then if you have like a follow question similar to like what we talk about, there's not as much out there. So it's like they only preach one thing and it just keeps going, as opposed to non-science-based lifters. There's just so much more room for like auto-regulation and all that type of stuff, and switching up your exercises based on what feels good. And like you said, with experience, which is what I'm learning now, how to auto-regulate, which I thought I knew, but I didn't until recently. So that's
Well, it's interesting because we've had a lot of people on the podcast, and the ones that are actually doing the research are not going to give us definitive answers, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of the ones that are proponents, I mean, this is just being fair. Like a lot of the ones that are proponents of the science-based training, not all of them, but most of them are not actually doing the science.
Right.
They're interpreting the science, right? And the science can only study one metric, right? And then if you watch that community as a whole, whatever's trending, they're all going to do, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
The stretch was like a big thing. So we're kind of like in
Oh
this,
yeah.
in this middle thing to what's going to be the next big thing, right? And then whatever that's going to be. And I'm not against the science at all, because I get all these journals, I get the Mass Research Review, which I think is the best one. And then some of the other, oh shit, Lane Norton has one. I should have wrote them down, but I basically get all of them. And I like the reviews, the journals that kind of review that, because they're reviewing what's in the science. But I can also, if I wanted to, I can cherry pick the shit out of all of this. Like if I wanted to find something that's going to say that doing dynamic upper work for your squat, bench, and deadlift is the most optimal, which is a weird word. Like what the hell's optimal mean? Is the most optimal. I can go find all that, put it all out there and be able to put it there. And just the other day, I saw a video from Brownlee on this topic, and he used a comparison of a chef, which was amazing, right? Because if you have a world-class chef, right, in our sphere, that would be the bro.
Yeah. Oh, is
Right.
this the one with like the drawings and the doodles?
Yeah.
I watched it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah. Right. And so if, the scientists can't tell the chef how to make this perfect dish, right? They can say, well, based upon this, this, and this, I think he used salt as an example. He used 3 tablespoons of salt. It was a perfect analogy for what all this is and kind of how it all plays out, because there's so many variables, and we need to study them. We need to get a handle on all of them. But if somebody's making progress, it shouldn't change what they're doing. It just happens to be in this community that the people who are doing certain things are going to find those things to support their bias, where they should look for those things that are going to violate the bias so they can be well rounded. Because everybody, when you get to that point of when you need to start regulating things, everybody's going to be a little different based upon what their training goals, training objectives are. And so they both matter, which is, the bro lifters are using some type of science for their training. I mean, the whole process is to stimulate and then adapt, which is essentially science, right?
Yeah.
And they're trying things and it doesn't work, so they try something else, which is kind of like the science. They're testing things, which is the scientific method, right? Then on the science side, they're using the bros in a lot of cases to be able to do the studies, but they're not studying anybody for 5 years that I know of, or 4 years. So it still comes down to, you got to figure shit out.
Yeah. Yeah. Another one we have on here is kind of bridging the gap between bodybuilding versus powerlifting. I think we had a guest out here, Eugene Bazemore. I mean, I watched him train. You were in here and lifts crazy things, and he said on the podcast one thing he'll always go back to is bodybuilding. Like if I forget the exact context, if he said he was like hurt or if he feels like he needs to work on something, he goes back to bodybuilding. And in powerlifting, I'm seeing that there's accessory movements after you do like your main movements. So, which when I do the accessory movements, it feels like bodybuilding movements, which I enjoy doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, what is the I guess bridging that gap between the two, like, or trying to like, are they very similar or are they like two completely different animals?
I see them as two completely different animals. And the reason why is, if this power building, or whatever you want to call it, it's been called different, trying to maximize both, right, has been a selling point, a marketing thing since I was a kid, right? And it's doable if you want to be mediocre or both, right? It's definitely
No.
doable, right? But if you want to, excel at one to your best ability, then you're not going to be able to do both, right? Some have. I mean, some have turned, IFBB pros and all the other stuff by doing both. But I can't think of any that have continued to keep doing that, once they qualify or once they get in there. It's not a long-term approach. One of them's going to kind of have to go out. And my distilled version of all that is when you're dealing with bodybuilding or basic hypertrophy training, it's kind of easy. It's not easy from the sense of you don't need to train hard. You need to train hard. It's easy from the programming sense. You're going to hit these movements for these body parts, and there's various, you can do total body, you can do all these different, anything's going to work year 1 through 5. Right. But at a certain point, you're going to figure out what your body needs, what's too much, what's too little. Right. And then you just need to do the movements for that body part, be able to stimulate that body part to create the adaptation that you need. Right. And you're dealing with rep ranges in most cases that are going to be, I want to say 4, but it can be like, say, over 5. Right? 5 to 10. It can be higher, whatever it's going to be. But when you're dealing with rep ranges that are going to be over 5 or whatever, you're not typically dealing with 90% weight. You're dealing with 80%, 75% total tonnage, weight, intensity that you're going to deal with. So it's going to be harder to get hurt when you're dealing with that. Then you're going to train, the other thing that comes up. You're going to train to failure, close to failure, whatever the hell, 2 reps shy of failure. My stance on the whole thing is you're pretty much guaranteed if you go to failure.
Yeah.
That covers it. And for most people, that's not going to put them in this state where they're not going to be able to recover because of all that. But with that in mind, in most of the cases, the movement's not going to matter as long as it's training that muscle part, right? I'll see programs to where if it's hypertrophy and it's for the chest, right? They're going to use the same movement for 6 or 8 weeks, and that's fine. That's okay. It's boring as hell, but it's okay. And I've always wondered if it's, just a horizontal press, does your chest really know, if it's your specifically the pectoral muscle, right? Is it really going to know? Is it dumbbell? Is it a barbell? Is it a freaking machine? Why does it have to stay the same for 8 weeks? Which is contradictory to everything that I've ever seen in my entire life, to where most of the bodybuilders that I know, all the way from amateur to professional level, a lot of the times they're changing the movement every single time they go in the gym. Why are they doing that? Because maybe they do want to start with incline dumbbell press every time, but they go in the second time and the shoulder don't feel right. So it's like, screw it. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to the Smith machine, something that's going to support it a little bit more so I can still do what I need to be able to do, which is to create the stimulus that's going to require the adaptation for them to be able to grow, right? So they move it through. The ones that will stick to it are stupid, because if they're doing it and their shoulders jacked up every single time they do it, or in your case, your knee, you've been kind of dealing around with that. So if we take one of the movements that aggravates your knee and it's like, oh shit, this doesn't feel well on my knee, but I got to do it for 8 weeks. So fuck it. I'm going to do it for 8 weeks. You're fucking retarded.
Yeah, I definitely didn't do that. I switched it up.
Yeah. You want to, that's that process that I'm talking about, where bodybuilding's a little bit easier to navigate, right? It's way harder because the nutrition matters a whole lot more. All the other variables matter a whole lot more, but managing the fatigue is a little bit easier in my opinion. When you're dealing with the strength blocks, strength powerlifting and stuff like that, now you're lifting those weights that are over that 90% threshold. So now all kinds of other shit's getting involved, that's going to create more systemic fatigue and more joint issues and all these other kind of things, because that load is so high, right? Now, when you're trying to take and combine both of those together, right, it's almost a recipe for disaster, right? Because one, that's if you're going to try to train the hypertrophy work like a bodybuilder and train like a powerlifter. There's a reason why they're 2 different sports. You can't put here's my powerlifting program, then I'm just going to do my bodybuilding program after it. It's got to be a hybrid of what that bodybuilding program is going to be. But essentially what happens with the strength work is the bodybuilding, the hypertrophy stuff becomes these accessories, right? Which, yes, there are in there for hypertrophy stimulus, but they're also in there to bring up weak points and stuff like that, right? So it goes in there, but it becomes a little bit different as far as mitigating that, because that load is so high on those main lifts that it is harder to recover from, right? Which let's go back to just the pure hypertrophy training. Why do you want to put something in there that makes it harder to recover from, but doesn't yield the results that you're looking for? That does not make sense. In contrast, if it's the power lifter and now you're doing this insane amount of volume and effort, of the hypertrophy work, like, why are you doing that if it's going to make it harder to recover from the heavy bouts that you need to do throughout the week and into the next weeks? You need to recover from the shit that's going to actually help you get better, not recover from the things that you just want to do. Right. So that's the difference. It's still going back into this auto-regulation thing, but it floats in there to where there's different ways that you can periodize the training. One is to divide it out into blocks. So you'd have a hypertrophy block, right? In the strength world, a hypertrophy block, I think they're too short. Some will have it for like 4 to 6 weeks, which I don't really see the point of that. Like, how much muscle you realistically going to put on in 4 to 6 weeks? It's like, not a lot, where if that block is 3 or 4 months, right, and the focus is just on that, the main lifts can still be in there, but the intensity, the load is going to be lower, and then train for the higher reps to be able to build that hypertrophy. But what you're really doing is reducing that systemic fatigue of the 90% weights to be able to put more effort into that hypertrophy training. And then from that block, you'll transition into more of a strength block to where the weights will then start to go up on those things. But then those accessories are going to start to move closer to the minimal effective volume, for that, and kind of physically go that way. In a conjugate approach, you're always going to kind of keep both in at all times, which is more mitigating, and really, for the people that go down that road, and it's the road I've lived in most of my life, learning how to auto-regulate all the variables is vital. It's extremely vital. If you don't know that, then you probably shouldn't be doing conjugate training at all, right? If you do, my bias, this is the best training that you can possibly do, because you can manage all those things.
That's good to know, because I'm definitely been power building, but yeah. So I mean, I think it's a good.
Not necessarily, because the way it was the workout that you showed me yesterday, that would not be defined as the power building.
Okay.
Right. The power building would be, it was, what was it? A squat session?
Yeah, it was like a squat session. Like, it started out with like, I'm right now, I think I'm in like block 3. It's like 90%, 1 rep max, squat, then you rack it. So
Yeah.
basically cluster sets. And then it was like Zercher squats, which I put in just because I like them a lot. And then the rest was more just like dumbbell Bulgarians. There were some farmers walks and stuff in
Yeah.
there.
So
These
see,
are
all those
different
things are
ones,
kind of playing into building that squat, as far as the stability of the spinal position, the ability to maintain a brace. All those things are kind of put in there for that purpose. Where if you're going into this pure power building, you would have done the squats and you would have went on to the leg presses. And then you would have went on to, the leg extensions, leg curls, calves, and all that other kind of stuff. And then trained that leg press like you would if it was your primary movement on a leg day. That's what I'm talking about. Those, when it's laid out the way that it's being laid out and you're trying to kind of do both, the advice I'd have there is there's going to be certain body parts that are not going to be really targeted that much in a strength program, biceps, for instance.
Yeah.
So you can slip in an arm day and shit like that. It's not going to create that much fatigue that is going to create this recovery problem, right? The calves, stuff like that. I mean, all those things, even side delts to a certain degree. I mean, certain things in strength programs will be a little more ignored, that you can always put in those more isolation type movements towards the end of the training or even on a different day. And it's not going to have any ill effect, because it's not like you're going to throw in heavy cheat barbell curls with 225 and you're horse cocking the whole thing. You're not going to be throwing that in. It's going to be like freaking dumbbell curls or something.
Yeah.
What we suggested Noah do is, because he is lifetime Natty and is going to stay, hopefully, lifetime Natty.
Yep, definitely.
Right. So
no plans
there's no plans. Whereas, let's say that changes, and 5 years, whatever it's going to be, years later, you don't have a baseline. So a lot of the people that will come out and we'll talk about Merrick Health and the labs and the benefit for all those. And there's vast benefits to be able to have your lab markers. That's not even a mystery anymore. MerrickHealth.com/table talk discount code. Table Talk, to be able to save it. They've been a sponsor of the podcast for several years, and there's a reason. What would be really cool, and this is everybody that I know who's enhanced, is what were my numbers before, right? Because if somebody's using, and then after 2 years of using, they're like, well, I should probably get my blood work checked. What's the baseline, right? Because certain things may just be out genetically or whatever it's going to be, but you don't know. One personal example for me is my hemoglobin is always high, right? And real high, and problematic high, until I was speaking to my mother about it, and then found out that so was my dad's, to the point they were sending him to the Cleveland Clinic all over the place. So and then some genetic testing and others, it's in there. Right. So that, yes, it's still got to be watched, but that changes that variable, right? Because it would have been high, and it probably was, had I been tested, for that before I got on anything. Right. But when you look at that and it's like, oh shit, that's ridiculously high. You don't know what your baseline is. And I'm just using one marker as an example. All yours came back great, right? So where your baseline of everything is. Aside from that, let's say we get 2 years down the road and your total testosterone, I think, was like 575, in a good range. 3 years down the road, let's say it drops to like 300, right? Well, it's a drop.
Yeah.
Right. So that's may have to be addressed, but because where it was, what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or it could be somebody that's been on for 5 or 6 years and they go off for, I don't know, 8 weeks or a month, and all their testosterone super low. They don't know what the hell the base was to be able to begin with. So just having that base for anybody, I think is really important to be able to have. And I think people look at these telehealth networks and Merrick and stuff like that and think, well, this is really only for those people who are enhanced. And that's not the case at all, because there's shit that's messed up in almost everybody, that, especially as you get older. I mean, yours was phenomenal, right? Which is cool, right? So you don't have to wait a year or two, get it done again, be able to see what's going to be. Your D was good. Everything that you would expect to be bad, even for somebody that's natural, was good.
Yeah. That sounds about right. One thing I've kept hearing from literally everybody who does use, they say once you're on, you're never really off. Is that so basically, if you start, you basically have to go with cycles the rest of your life, basically? Is that for everything, or is it just pick and choose kind of what your body needs? Because
I don't physically believe that's true, but everybody that I've ever known, that ends up being the case. Right.
By choice, because you said you don't think you have to? Is that more just like
I
they
think
want
people
to?
could cycle off if they wanted to. Now, granted, I don't believe their testosterone is going to be where it needs to be, right? It's if somebody's taken shit for 10, 15 years, from what I've seen, the odds of that ever coming back into a normal range are pretty much nil. It's not going to be able to happen. But it is there are things that I think people overlook and that gets downplayed. And I've been around this space since the 80s, my entire life. So I have friends of mine that have been on for 30, 40 years. And I do see things that may be correlated or spurious correlations, right? It depends who you talk to. I've seen heart issues. Now granted, there's people that will push back against me and say, well, those would have happened anyhow. I've seen kidney issues. Again, people are going to push back, say that would have happened anyhow. And my retort to that is, so you honestly think that the 35 years of blasting shit didn't play any part of this at all? You know what I'm saying? There's a common sense factor here that it's like, and I get where it comes from, because years ago when you would go, or if I would go in to see any physician about anything, it didn't matter if it was, I'm trying to think of an example. I was going to say it didn't matter if it was a boil, but the boil may be because of taking too much shit. It didn't matter if I had a cold. No matter what the reason was that I was there, it was always because of the testosterone. Always. It did not matter. That was the first thing out of their mouth, is you need to quit taking testosterone. Right? That's kind of like changed since then. But so I get where this comes from, right? Because shit, it's in the, I don't know when the package insert went away, but there used to be a package insert inside the testosterone when I was younger that would show all the side effects and shit like that. And then in this little box, it actually said, this will not enhance performance or something like that, which is complete bullshit, which is in there.
Why do they put that then? If you're buying it to enhance performance, why is that even in there? Like, do they?
I don't know.
have
I
to
should
or
have asked
something,
Rick
or-
Collins about that, but it was in there. It was a joke. I mean, it was like funnier than hell, because it was one of them. Most of the shit now doesn't have package inserts because people are just getting it. Actually, no, my prescription does. I mean, it's a little tiny thing, and then you unravel it, and it's like fucking this big with small print of all the side effects and shit that can happen. And in that, it had that one thing in there, which is like, this is complete bullshit, because people were using it for athletic. There's a whole campaign propaganda bullshit against all that. But where I'm going with this is, I see where, if somebody's been on that long and then now they have that same physician or a different physician saying, hey, look, your heart issues may be attributed to, this testosterone. They're going to be like, bullshit. Right. And, it's, there's too many, to be able to say that long-term abuse, I should be clear on that, in my opinion, has to have some negative effect, to that. And to think otherwise, I think you're an idiot. You're just kind of playing into all that. And now there's no reason for somebody who's no longer competing to be blasting at the same level that they were before, but that also still happens, and all these other variables that kind of play into all that. So but is it possible for somebody to go on for a short time, say a handful of years, and they're not in their 25 to 35, and then go off and be able to have everything, their sperm count, testosterone all return? 100%. 100%. And be within normal ranges if they were in normal ranges before. If they had a baseline to know what their normal range was, be able to get that back. So to say that you're going to be on forever is I don't believe that's completely accurate. If you start when you're 40, yeah, probably.
All right. Last question. I actually just thought of it now. The steroids aside, so just for only natural people, obviously, well, I'm trying to think how to word it, but I think, how do you know when you've hit your natural limit? Obviously, your numbers aren't going up or you can't recover as well. I think that's kind of like the baseline, but is there ever like a clear indication like you're not gonna get stronger? Like this is kind of it.
Deceiving. It's
Yeah.
deceiving
Yeah.
because it's the same way if you're enhanced, right? Because you're not just going to take shit and then just continue to keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. Otherwise, we'd have people benching 3,000 pounds, right? I mean, there's always going to be this limit, and I have nothing to be able to back this up except just observation. It seems like that's when you think you're at that limit, you're probably still 2 levels away. Right. For myself, I thought I was at the limit before I came to Westside. And then when I came to Westside, training changed, a lot of variables changed. I was enhanced before, was enhanced then. That didn't change in any degree whatsoever. But I was stuck for several years and just hoping if I could just put my best numbers together. And then there was enough change, enough stimulus in the technical factor, the physical, and the mental factor that there was another 270 some pounds on my total that came, because of that. So I thought that I was there, right? But it's never, I'll say that then you have injuries led. So I didn't get there's another tier, that will pop up through. I didn't get that because I was too fucked up. The joints were too damaged, but usually that first tier just comes when you start to take all the variables of your training a little bit more seriously. And then that next bump comes when you learn how to use all the other nuanced variables. Like how can I explain that? The first one is you're training hard. You think you're doing everything right. You're eating right. You're doing all those things. And that's going to get you to a certain point. Then you're going to hit that point. Then you're going to kind of get stuck there. Then it's going to be frustrating. Just dialing in those variables by learning how to auto-regulate and all those other type of things will take that next bump, right? Because you haven't figured it out. You got to that first level just trying to figure it all out. Right. Once you get to that first level and it's really stuck and you start going back and thinking about all the things that did work, didn't work, what you can eliminate, what you should put in, then that comes that next one. Right. And that's just more of the training, the nutrition, all those type of things. The one that happens after that is because now you're going to be older because we age. It's a fact. There's no way to get younger. And, the next one that comes in is when that next level, that becomes when you start really looking at your ability to recover better, right? So then you get to this weird level to where it's not about training harder, it's about training smarter, but still hard. And then doubling down on the sleep, looking at stress, looking at all these other things that you haven't looked at before, then that gives that next bump, right? And all these things, if you stick with it, are going to kind of happen automatically. I do wonder if somebody was to implement all of them from the jump, would it lead to better gains? And I don't think so. I think if they do all the right, this is going to sound really, really screwed up. If they do all the things exactly as they should, which is the most optimized for their own performance from the very jump, I think they limit their career. I just want to take a moment to let you know about our crew. What our crew is, it allows the show to stay independent, and it's the reason why the podcast is still here now. The podcast is free to listen to, but it's not free to produce. It keeps going because of the sales through elitefts, our show sponsors, but more importantly, our crew members. The reason I love this is for many reasons, is it keeps the show independent. So I can pick who I want to speak to. I can pick what topics I want to speak to, and I don't have to be accountable to anybody. I just go off what the crew members want and what the audience wants, and I don't have to deal with all the other bullcrap that's associated with the podcast world. In return, what you get with the crew is ad-free episodes that are released a day ahead of time. You get access to our Discord community, which has AMAs, like 60 ebooks. We try to put a new ebook out every single month. Access to our coaching community with form checks, training Q&As. It also gives you invitations to our training retreats that are out here in the gym once or twice a year. 76% of all the people that joined in 2022 are still members now. Right now, you can either go month to month or get 2 months free with an annual plan. Just look for the link in the description, look at the QR code, or search elitefts.com crew and join today. It means a lot.